Hello, everyone. Welcome to our December panel for the Hazard and Climate Resilience Institute, and also supported by the Boise State Resource Nexus for Sustainability Grand Challenge project. And today we're going to be sharing stories about changing Idaho agriculture and rural communities. And I'm really excited for the panelists we have here. We have a last minute switch up, which I will talk about in a moment. But before I jump into that, I always like to start these panels by talking a little bit about what the goals of this panel series is that we hold monthly, and then a little bit about the specific topic we're going to be talking about today, and then we will introduce our panelists. So the goals of these panels are really to bring in voices from across disciplines and sectors to learn about some of the ongoing projects that are happening here in Idaho and elsewhere, find out how university researchers and students can better support the efforts that are going on locally and better support information needs here in our community, and consider what are the actions that we can take moving forward to help build resilient, sustainable communities. And so with our institute, we define community resilience as the capacity of a community or region to adapt to change and thrive despite the chronic stresses and acute shocks they may experience. So keep that in mind as we're bringing that term up. This year, the panel series is also talking about sustainability, and as you've probably seen from the topics that we've had, this is a wide net of information and topics that we can be talking about related to sustainability. But we've been thinking about it in this way of meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And so here we have the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and I think there's a number of these goals that we will probably hit on today, whether that's industry, innovation, and infrastructure, number 9, number 12, responsible consumption and production, or number 2, zero hunger. So we're going to be talking about all sorts of interesting topics today. So I am so pleased to have our panelists here today. We had a last minute switch out of Agee Smith will be here instead of Brenda, but we're really excited to have him, and we're so excited to have everyone else who's here. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Dr. Jared Talley, who is a clinical assistant professor in environmental studies in the School of Public Service here at Boise State. So take it away, Jared.
Well, hello, everybody. I'm really excited to introduce the panelists today. These are 3 people, and I will say Brenda Richards is a rancher out of the Owyhee County here in Idaho, and the executive director of the Idaho Rangeland Conservation Partnership. And she couldn't be here today. She's out sick with the flu, so thank you, Agee, for stepping in. But I know she would really like to be here as well. All of these people are wonderful colleagues and peers of mine who I've had the wonderful opportunity of learning a lot from. And so I'm very excited to hear from them as we ask some questions. We've got Brandy Wilson, who's the sustainability coordinator for Simplot, and has a rich history of this work. And one of the things that Brandy's work really sticks out is her focus on education and the Yellowstone experiential education that she does. And maybe that'll come up, maybe it won't. There's Agee Smith, is a rancher on the Cottonwood Ranch in northern Nevada, part of the Shoesole Resource Management Group, the Stewardship Alliance of Northeastern Elko County, something like that. SANE, really just thoughtful thinker. As a professional philosopher, I'd say he's a philosopher as well on the land. I'm excited to hear from him. And then Brit Raybould. She's a PhD student here in the public policy student, also family farm in East Idaho, a potato farm, and also a sitting legislator, and works on water management and has a diverse perspective here as well. But they will give more information about who they are as we get into this. And so what I want to do is start off, and maybe we'll start with Brandy, but everyone answer this question. Can you please introduce yourself and tell your story of how you came to be in your role and position? And what does rural agriculture play? What role does it play in your life, either personal or professional?
Well, thanks, Jared, and thanks for inviting me to be a part of this panel. This is just a great opportunity to talk about some of the things that are very near and dear to my heart. So, as Jared said, I'm Brandy Wilson. I'm the Global Sustainability Director for the Simplot company. I grew up in Pocatello, and so I was surrounded by potatoes, and I was a 4-H kid, even though I was a townie. So, like, I was in a club that had farm kids, but, you know, I was there with my Cocker Spaniel while everybody else had their goats and cows, but that's cool. I was the first in my family to go to college, and upon graduation, I found work doing environmental compliance. So I did primarily like NEPA, Superfund site cleanup, things like that for a large consulting firm. And then in the early 2000s, I heard about sustainability, and I thought, well, that's interesting. I could spend my career cleaning, you know, preventing problems instead of cleaning them up. And that had a certain level of appeal. So I did our first sustainability report for my previous company back in 2005 and started doing a sustainability consulting practice with clients in timber, mining and manufacturing, chemical manufacturing, all kinds of stuff, and traveled a lot all over the world, although I was always based here in Boise. So I did that for about 21 years. And then 5 years ago, I got the opportunity to come over to Simplot and stand up a sustainability program for our company. And it was really like coming home. It's like all of this experience and all of these things I had seen everywhere. It was just great to bring that back here. And of course, Simplot is just so diverse with the mining and manufacturing end of things, and the agricultural retail, plus all the food processing, and really being able to work across that entire agriculture value chain and kind of get back in touch with my rural roots has been amazing. And being able to do this with great partners like Jared and other folks throughout Idaho is wonderful as well. So that's kind of where I'm from and what I'm about. And Jared, you're on mute.
I'll never get over that. Brit, you want to take a stab at that? What's your story, and what role does rural agriculture play in your life, personal or professional?
So as far as like rural ag goes, it's part of who I am. Having been born and raised on farm as third generation. As I was growing up, I wasn't convinced I wanted to come back. And in fact, at 18, when I left to go to college, I swore I was never coming back. And now I live across the street from my parents. So it just goes to show that we're not as wise as we think we are when we're 18, and that hopefully we gain a little wisdom over time. And, as I look at the landscape for agriculture, just in general, not, even necessarily specific to Idaho, but just in general, we're facing a series of challenges that I think are sort of hitting people not unexpectedly, right? Because we're always dealing with sort of the change that comes from from any situation when you're dealing with the environment, but just from sort of the growing realities of what happens when we have a supply chain backup and we have to wait a year before we can get a piece of equipment, or we're in a position where the water year may not be great, and so our supplies that we were counting on to get us through a particular crop cycle, we can no longer count on that. So we've got to make that, that adaptation to either switch to a different crop or protect, or potentially to let ground go uncultivated for a season, because there just aren't the resources there to do it. And then you add on top of that the input costs going into it, and just as a whole, I think there's some argument to be made around the question of how do we continue to keep agricultural as a sustainable part of our economy, while at the same time recognizing that there are all of these different realities that we're now having to face head on in a way that you're sort of colliding all at once, and can sometimes feel overwhelming. So from my perspective, my role is less sort of on the day-to-day side of farm management. That very much falls into the capable hands of my partners that are my brother and my father. And where I spend a lot of my time and attention are focusing on the financials and the technology and the regulatory side of things, which in turn led me into my current position serving in the state legislature, and very interested in sort of good policy and what are the things that we should be doing to be proactive. And, because I didn't have enough to do, I applied for and was accepted to BSU's PhD program, with the idea again being of, how again do we take into account all of these different pieces and do our best to sort of bring them together so that we can continue to have I think what we all have a great appreciation for, which is a strong agricultural community, that sense of having a connection to the land and to, you know, the state that I think, you know, most of us are not only proud to call home, but believe is unique amongst some of the other places out there, and that we would like to have, you know, continue on with that tradition, but recognize that maybe some of the things that we have done before are not going to be sustainable into the future, and how can we accommodate and meet those challenges.
That is so wonderful. The Agee, your story and how agriculture plays a role in your life, personal or professional. You're on mute, Agee.
Okay. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Technology. I'll never quite get it, I guess. But anyway, so yeah, thank you, Jared. This is very last minute, and it sounds like a very interesting panel. We're of course in Nevada, but we're very, very close to Idaho. We're only about 20 miles south of the border. We have an awful lot of a lot of our neighboring ranch is Simplot. We border a lot of their range. We do all of our business in Idaho. Lots of people talk about Nevada and California being so connected, but in our end of the state up here, we're much more connected to Idaho than we are to California. So the journey, we have a ranch up in the O'Neill Basin, so it's very rural. It's on the east side of the Jarvidge Mountains, 70 miles to the nearest town. And in that town, you can't really buy anything. So Twin Falls, Idaho is where we end up going for all of our supplies and things. So graduated from University of Nevada, Reno with an animal science degree. And after that, I often have said if I went back, it would be to get a range degree and a business degree. If you can take care of all those other things, that taking care of the animal becomes easy. But so I came back to the ranch after being in the Marine Corps for a couple of years in the late 70s. It was a very typical. There was 5 siblings on this place. Mom and Dad, when they moved on to it, they really didn't have anything but a 4-room log cabin and a corral and an old barn. So they created a ranch, and out of this cow camp, basically, is what it had been. They didn't have any income to begin with, so when they first started in the business, they went into guiding hunters. And so that sort of put us into the guest business, which is something we've carried on through all these years. So it's not only a cow-calf ranching, but it's also a guiding business. But we were in the 80s, we were in tremendous conflict with the agencies. Riparian concerns were becoming very important, and people, it had sort of been thought of, the riparians had sort of been thought of as sacrifice areas, and they were becoming coming to the surface that they weren't. They were floating to the top. So, and our riparian areas on this place were in terrible shape. They're all of their monitoring sites and stuff put what we were doing in poor condition. So in those years of trying to change things and turn things around and not knowing what you don't know, really not knowing what to do about the situation, and also to sort of starting to believe that maybe I was involved in a business that was harming the environment. So in the mid 90s, Alan Savory came to Elko and was a keynote speaker at the Cowboy Poetry Gathering, the annual thing in Elko there. So And that was a turning point in my life. There was a real interest in what he had to say. We brought classes, another ranch brought classes to Elko for HM, for holistic resource management. And so after going to one of those classes, it was sort of like a light bulb came on, and it, instead of viewing livestock, which is cattle, was the industry that I was in, as definitely users of the land, potentially abusers of the land. Now, all of a sudden, the thought that you could actually use them to rehabilitate the land was a huge divergent from my thought patterns. So we basically got together with the agencies and another. It was sort of one of those things when the right people come together, they come together. And anyway, we formed this group, the SHUSO, which is, to begin with, it was the Cottonwood Ranch HM Holistic Management Team, and it's grown with a couple other ranchers, and now it's the SHUSO Resource Management Group. But we went down, we started, the BLM, we worked with the BLM and the Forest Service, and we decided to take this operation, and instead of having it be Forest, BLM, private, we were going to manage this as a whole. The Forest Service and the BLM did a joint EA, so that we put the ranch into an experimental status, and they gave us total flexibility on the place, increased our numbers by threefold that we could run, and we were off and running. So to begin with, there was, of course, as anything new, there was the challenges, but after about 3 years, we sort of started settling into having things start to work. And so now I never could have dreamt that we would be as far along with the riparian health as we are now when we first started. Of course, when you first start something, you're hoping that it works. But this worked beyond my dreams. These riparian areas have just changed and blossomed through the years. It took a while. I mean, it didn't just happen overnight. I'd say it took about 10 years to start seeing things really start to turn around. But once they did, it was just, they just improved exponentially. And then beavers became a part of it. And instead of fighting with beavers, they became our friend. And there's just all sorts of, I've taken all sorts of workshops. I feel like I've learned more in the workshops through the years that I've taken than I ever did in college. Lately, one of the latest things that we've been working on is soils, and always knowing that soils were hugely important, but not really realizing how that all was tied together and working. So we've been working with Nicole Masters from New Zealand, and the changes that are happening on the private now with the soils is absolutely amazing. So anyway, that's sort of my journey, and my kids now, my daughter and son-in-law, pretty much run the place. I sort of just do what they tell me to do, and enjoy our 2 grandsons that live with us here too. So on the place, we're very fortunate. We're blessed. We live in a beautiful area. It's got one of the, it gets more moisture than most of Nevada. So we're blessed in that area. It gets cold. It gets very, very cold up here in the basin. But
and for the
anyway,
participants,
that answers the question.
Sorry, Agee. For the participants, if you ran across an article recently in the New York Times about beaver and ranches in Nevada, that is Agee's ranch. Agee's quoted in that. So you can go look at New York Times, look up beaver, and it's within the last month or two to learn more about what Agee's talking about there. Brit, I want to go back to you with this question. As things change in Idaho, so you specifically in Idaho, but Agee, as you think about this in the region, what agricultural challenges are you seeing? And are there new opportunities that come with these changes, you know, population growth, climate, limited resources, et cetera?
I mean, the obvious one is water. You know, there's never going to be enough to meet all of the demand. We're seeing that sort of at a higher pressure level with what's going on in the Colorado River Basin. And I don't think we're on the verge of those conditions in Idaho quite at this point, but I think it is a level of awareness that we need to have. There is always going to be a certain amount of conflict that exists when it comes to water, in large part because everything we have right now is it's appropriated. The water that we have available has a home, and anytime you have growth coming into the community, you bring with it the potential that you're going to have some disruption, either in the form of conversions from agricultural property to residential or commercial. So you have that element to account for as well, but also taking into account the fact that you are changing how that landscape is being used and what that means for the surrounding area. I mean, even just our ability to move equipment around, it becomes more challenging the more people you get into an area. And so as we see a breakup and less consolidation just in terms of where agricultural acres are, and those are getting pockmarked with more developments along the way, you know, you have to factor that in. I would say some of the other things to take into account too are just the fact that the way that we manage in relation to the seasons, we're having to accommodate and respond to, you know, whether that means, you know, changing, you know, the date in the spring, you know, when we're able to get into the fields, or if the fields happen to be wetter because we have a shift from primarily snowpack moisture as we shift maybe more towards precipitation and rain and what that does for our ability to get into the fields. And then as we, you know, go through that summer growing season, if, you know, we continue to have enough of ongoing precipitation to match up with what we have in terms of storage water to get our crops through, higher temperatures are, of course, a factor. And then, you know, we get into the fall season and with the uncertainties that can sometimes come with our ability to get a crop in before there's a significant fluctuation. And really what all of these moving parts mean is that for anyone who's actively engaged in ag at this point, you got to be proactive and you've got to think on your feet, and you can't assume that simply what happened in the prior growing season is going to be predictive of what happens in the next growing season. And that isn't always a good fit for folks who have been used to doing it a certain way for decades, you know, at a stretch. And that's what we see is that some of those who just feel like they can't make the transition, they're moving away from it and are either selling their land for development purposes or selling out to other farms. And so we see a different kind of consolidation in ag with some farms growing bigger and or being converted into other developments.
And Brandy, from your perspective and your role, what challenges for agriculture are you seeing? And you have a very unique role in this group.
Yeah, and definitely, like I really see and feel and connect with all the things that Brit has just talked about and that Agee has talked about in terms of, you know, experimenting and trying different things and having to think on your feet and needing to change things as you go. And one of the unique things about my role is that I get to be out with the sustainability directors for all of these food companies and for the high-tech companies, and even for companies like Anderson Windows. Like I know the sustainability guy from Anderson Windows, right? But when I'm out with these folks, one of the constant things that I always hear is that, you know, we need to be more sustainable in our food system. And so we need to convince farmers to change, and we need to convince ranchers to change. And I think this is where we start to hit some of that like rural urban conversation a little bit too, and where people don't really understand how it works. Because, you know, when you hear Brit talk and you hear Agee talk, you really hear about, and particularly with Brit, that business side of it, right? The financial side of it. And the idea here is that farmers are growing for markets. And so the biggest change that I see is that we really need to help and support the markets to change to enable the farmers to be more resilient. Like we have to build that bridge and make that connection. And that's just kind of become my life's mission lately. So one of the things that I'm seeing out on the ground, especially, you know, a couple of years ago, I took one of the McDonald's sustainability people out to visit one of our growers in Caldwell. And the McDonald's person said, "What can we do as a company to help you be more sustainable, grower?" And the grower's like, "Let me grow a different kind of potato," right? I mean, it's just that simple. Like the market wants to have the same kind of experience and food experience at the end of the day, whether you're growing corn for corn chips or whether you're growing potatoes for fries. For any of these companies, they want to have that consistency. And as consumers, we get used to what a bag of Fritos tastes like. But we might have to change some of that. I mean, we've got great varieties that are coming out that can deal better with temperature, with drought, that use fewer nutrients in field, like all of these other things. But it's not just about how do we get farmers to change. It's about how do we in a food market and in a consumer packaged good market change what we want and what consumers expect, right? And so we've got all these consumer expectations around sustainability. So I just think that we're at a really interesting time right now where we could actually drive some changes in the market that allow our farmers and ranchers to be better business people and grow things that are more adapted to the way that our climate is changing. And we know what some of these changes are going to be. I mean, not absolutely for sure, but, you know, we just finished the Idaho Climate Economy Impacts Assessment and released that a year ago. And what that does is it spells out like, how much longer is the growing season going to be? Can we expect more weather and more of our water in terms of rain or snowpack? And how does that affect water availability? How cold is it going to be at night in the winter in the future? And does that mean we're going to have to start refrigerating our potato storages? I mean, just all of that stuff is just handled in these reports. Oh, and thank you for dropping that link, Carson. That's great. And I really encourage people to go out and take a look at it. And, you know, we've taken it out and talked with folks about it. I know that University of Idaho Extension has taken it out to some growers. But having this information really enables me to then turn around to some of our customers and say, hey, you know, this is what we're looking at. This is where things are heading. Can you help us be more sustainable by actually looking at this from that business sustainability perspective? So I think every grower that I talk to, every farmer, every rancher, they know that things are different. And they know that things are changing. You know, we've got these reports showing what kind of changes we're going to anticipate. And now the job really is to create a better conversation so that we can drive the changes that we need to, you know, at scale, and not just kind of keep pushing the conversation down onto the rural folks and saying you need to change. It's like, no, we all actually have a role in this. We all need to change.
It's wonderful. Brit was talking about environmental challenges. Brandy, you're talking about market and economic and social challenges. Agee, and because I know your operation, what you're working on, can you speak to some of the policy challenges that you're working through, maybe with the virtual fence and experimental status, that sort of stuff?
Yeah, you know, traditions are great. They really are. There's value in that, but they also can be a trap. And just because, and I hear it all the time, well, we've always done it this way, or my grandfather did it this way and we're still doing it. And I can only speak of my industry, but there's a lot of people in the ranching industry that get stuck in that traditions and not taking a look at something new. A couple of things I wanted to hit. Brit talked about water. We're in the Columbia River Basin drainage, so our water goes to the Snake. But Las Vegas is definitely reaching farther and farther north for water. Probably will reach into Elko County in the future here. So anyway, so that's interesting that it's so far away, but yet it can really touch us quite close. And sustainable regenerative agriculture, that seems to be something that's being thrown around a lot, and it's so important. And working with Nicole and the soils and things, and just learning what you need to do to keep your soils healthy in that. and a lot of our farming practices are 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 very unsustainable, and they're creating a tremendous amount of damage out there, and people are becoming more and more aware of it. So I think it behooves us in agriculture to really pay attention to what we're doing, and 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 do the rather than either bury our heads in the sand or get our backs up. Let's see what we can do to better ourselves and our operations, and that. Okay, back to us. We're public land grazers. And so one of the things that we struggle with is government regulation in the grazing end of things. The agencies, in my opinion, the agencies have become very ineffective to a great degree because of the sort of the extreme environmental community's ability to tie their hands in lawsuits and in their different approaches of how they look at it. They want cattle and livestock off the land. They don't. There's nothing that they look at that is positive. And yet, if you really look at the science and all of that, this land grew up with grazing animals, even out here. The perfect example is the Great Plains. So by just taking livestock and true, if you could go back to having all those native animals that were out there that did the herbivory, that would be something, but we aren't going to go back to that. So livestock play an important role in the health of these ranges, and the other thing, not only in the health of the ranges, but in good healthy range, they're proving that a tremendous amount of carbon is brought out of the atmosphere and put into the ground with good range. And so but it's very, very hard to get to do something innovative or change. Talk about being in a rut. The agencies and their AMPs, their allotment management plans. It's like once you've put together an allotment management plan, it's sort of like it was chiseled in stone and can never be changed, which is ridiculous. So you have these plans. In our instance, we were doing things really going along, being innovative, and because of the lawsuit it wasn't even a lawsuit, it was just a threat of a lawsuit. The Forest Service basically has taken our permit and put it clear back to where it began in the 60s and 70s, and it makes no sense whatsoever. It makes no sense to the local people, the environmental community. They realize that if by forcing these permits back to taking away all of the flexibility and all of the innovative things that have gone along, that it will fail. And so that's going to be one more place that they can win. So it's very frustrating to be in public lands grazing at the moment at times. These collaborative efforts that I belong to are a bright spot. There's another collaborative that I belong to called the Roger group, and we just met with one of the higher ups in the BLM, and there's a real I believe there's a real willingness to try to do something about the inflexibility and the regs, and for people that are willing, and not everybody's willing to do that, but for people that are, one of the things, I don't know if you guys have heard about, they've got a program or an experimental type program going called outcome-based grazing. And basically what they're trying to do is get to a point where the agencies and everybody at the table agrees this is what we want to see out there on the range. Now, operator, how you get there we don't care. We just want an end result. And if you give, I honestly believe if you give the operators that kind of flexibility and that let them figure it out, they will. Now, not this isn't carte blanche. Just give everybody that ability, and of course it'll have to be monitored in that. But the way it's going now, the big stick and all the regulations, and they just seem to pile on more and more regulations. It's not working. The ranges are not improving. Sage-grouse numbers are not going up. LCT in our country, the Lahontan cutthroat trout, is not improving. Nothing. It's just not working across the board the way it is now. And what is it? The definition of insanity is to keep doing the same thing over and over again and expect a different result. Well, that's what's going on here with the agent. Well, that's what's going on a lot with the agencies, but there is some glimmers of hope to try to change this. So anyway, yeah, policy regulations, the inability to be flexible in the policy and government end is pretty stifling.
Yeah, across the board, I'm hearing that adaptability and experimentation is not something we just have to think about, but it's something we have to integrate into our practices across markets and cattle management and farm management and regulation policy. I want to ask
Jared, you asked about you said a virtual fence, so I didn't mention that.
Well,
so
we're running out of time a little bit, so we can talk about it in Q&A if that gets brought up. I do want to know from you all, you know, a lot of people in my experience in my line of work don't actually think or care a lot about agricultural sustainability or rural sustainability. And I want to know from you guys, what would you like to share on that, or to those people? What would you like people to know about rural and agricultural communities working in this sustainability and resilience space? And anyone can jump in at this point.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and jump in. And I guess it kind of goes back to, you know, I just really want folks to understand that farmers and ranchers are in a business, right? And that they're growing to our market. And so one of the things that I have the opportunity to do is as I mentioned, I get to go to these platforms where all these sustainability directors from, Facebook and Google and other places like that are. And, one of the questions I frequently get asked is, well, our employees are asking for us to just source our food locally, or they're asking for us to just go all organic, or they're asking for these different things. And, what really is the sustainable answer? Like what is the best thing? Is it regenerative agriculture? Is it conservation agriculture? Is it organic agriculture? Which is it? And what I really want people to understand is that it's and I know this sounds really super trite when I say it, but when I explain it, hopefully it'll help, but it's all agriculture, right? Like right now, things are changing so fast for the climate, like some of the things that Brit even talked about needing to be flexible from year to year, that Agee's talked about needing that flexibility as well. It's like, we just need to get over having one definition, is what I try to explain to people, and that we need a bunch of different tools from all of these different toolboxes to actually make it work. And so the more that we can, partner with people in our supply chain and say, okay, this is where we know a lot of our footprint is. How do we work together to improve it? What do we need to change? What do you need to change? That those conversations can produce some real results and some good, pilot projects and experimentation. We're involved in some pilot projects as well with our customers who are helping to fund some of those, and then some of the other environmental group partners that want to see things change as well. So I just really think, the one thing to understand is that we're all in business. We're all in business together. And we need to have that opportunity to really experiment and to try new things, and not just get locked into one definition, but pick the tools that we think are going to work for different areas. So.
Thank you. Brit, what would you like to share?
I think I would tack onto that there are capacity issues, and some of them are things that I think we can potentially fix, and there are others that are we just have to make make the best of. And in terms of the things I think we can fix, as crazy as it sounds, we have a workforce development issue in ag and in rural communities. My ability to go out and get someone to do, whether it's the seasonal labor or the year-round support that we need, it's a struggle. There just are not the same pools of folks who are available and are interested in doing the work that needs to be done. And for all the advancements that we've made with either automation or mechanization of different processes, I still physically have to have a body sitting in a potato truck moving potatoes out of the field to the storage facility. Same thing goes for my grain crops, for my hay crops. There is still a very with ag that so have the skill set and the technical knowledge to repair what is rapidly becoming a computer on very large wheels. The second piece of it too, we've been doing cover crop in our potato fields for over a decade at this point. But the problem is that by the time we get to the end of harvest, we've maybe been able to get about 2/3 of our potato acres with a legitimate cover crop that actually will hold the soil down into the next season, because we've essentially run out of time. There is no more time for that cover crop to be planted and then to get up above the soil enough for it to make a difference. And so I will admit to some of that idea of when we talk about ag, simply because we aren't doing 100% of everything that's being recommended as the best practice, it doesn't mean that we aren't trying within the capacity that we have to do it. And that if we are falling short, I would hope that folks recognize that it's not out of a lack or a lack of desire of not wanting to do more or not wanting to be more sustainable. It's just simply we're maxed out. And so taking that into account is part of sort of an assessment and judgment as to what we should be doing going forward, recognizing that there are those limitations within the system. It would help.
Yeah. And I mean, that's 100%, Brit. That's something that I try to talk to people about too, is I'm like, okay, I talk about this whole concept of like, you might have 30 or 40 harvests in your career, right? And one year it's going to work out and the next year it's not going to work out because maybe you ran out of water or maybe this or maybe that, or just ran out of time. And what I always tell people, and this kind of goes back to Jared, when you were on mute at the very first of the call, I'm like, imagine if you only had 40 Zoom meetings to get it right. Like, we've spent 3 years doing how many hundreds of these Zoom meetings? Imagine if you only had 40 to get it right. And so that's the thing that we're up against too. And that I think people absolutely, Brit, I'm right 100% with you, that people need to understand is that, things change from year to year. And sometimes your very best effort just isn't going to get there. And that's why, I think we need to have all these different tools and approaches that we can talk about and not just get so fixed on it has to be cover crop or it has to be no-till or it has to be organic or it has to be, any of these other like have tos, because what that does is that ultimately ends up tying your hands in terms of being able to make really good advancements.
Agee, we have just a few minutes left. Anything you'd like to share about that maybe people wouldn't know about agricultural rural sustainability?
Something that comes to mind that just did happen there in the beef business. There's a program that tracks whether you create natural beef or whatever. There's a program that tracks that where you don't use antibiotics and you don't do all these things, and it's a verification thing with the tag and all of that. It's a big deal and it's important, but we had quite the conversation with the buyers the other day that there's not really a when you sell, there's not really a compensation for that effort and for that in price, as if you weren't doing it at all. And there's no incentive. That really becomes a non-incentive to have people enter that program and do those things, which are good things to do. So anyway, markets,
Markets, workforce development, environmental challenges. And of course, as I've been listening, there's so much more that we could talk about. I mean, hours of this conversation. And what our goal is to introduce some of the broad concepts around agricultural and rural sustainability. And I think you've done wonderful in that. It's the environment, the markets, and the policy, and then the community. And whether or not we talked directly about the community, I think that was inherent in a lot of what we were talking about. Agee, I think back to you saying how wonderful it is to live on a ranch with, I think, 4 generations, your mom, you, your kids, and your grandkids. Brit,
Yeah.
your farm with your brothers and your dad, you know, this sort of social connectivity that agriculture and rural communities have is something we should think about. Brandy, is there something more you'd like to say? Otherwise, we'll turn over to Q&A here for the last 15 minutes.
No, good. Go ahead.
Awesome. Well, I am going to take over the Q&A portion. So thank you so much it's just been so fun to listen to all these stories and the conversation, and I'm just so glad to have you all here today. So we have a bunch of questions, and we had a few people submit questions in advance when they registered, and I wanted to pull out one of those pre-submitted questions, and then we'll get to some of the ones that are in the chat today. But somebody asked, what are ways that students with hopes of becoming urban or rural planners can help elevate the voices of citizens in rural Idahoan or Nevadan communities? So whoever wants to take that.
Go talk to them. I mean, that's as simple as it sounds. Go and be in the community, have conversations with the folks who are dealing with this on a day-to-day basis. There is a lot of value in learning skill sets and sort of background foundational in the classroom, but ultimately you're going to have a better grasp on what it is that you're trying to do if you're talking to the people who are actually having to live with the policy that's either getting designed or implemented.
I love that. I see Brandy and Agee nodding. Anything else you guys want to add to that? Nope. Okay, she covered it. Thanks, Brit. All right, we have a question from Jen Pierce. She said, thank you so much for the panel, for sharing your perspectives. What has been your experience on the land vis-a-vis changes in temperature and drought? What solutions do you see to mitigate these challenges? So maybe either Agee or Brit, if you want to start with that one.
Okay, drought. It's, you know, I think if you in this drought that we've been in, that hopefully maybe with a foot of snow on the ground we're coming out of maybe, but when water becomes one of these huge issues in drought, of course, and by working with nature instead of bucking nature and managing those cattle, using them as a tool to better the land and to better the riparian, we've been able to create really good riparian habitat. And then the beavers have always been involved in the system, but then once they have a good system to work in, they start building dams that stay and they create wetlands, and that has been a savior for us during these drought, is all of that stored water and all of that. Yeah, so working with nature, just creating good habitat helps get through these things, gets through the drought.
Thank you. Britt, do you want to add anything? I know you were talking about kind of trying to shift the timing of when things were happening based on these new conditions. So do you want to talk any more about that?
You know, I would just add, and this actually tags on a little bit with what Brandy was saying earlier. We've made some switches in terms of the varieties that we plant, and even sort of the crop rotation and what fields we're using for certain crops based on water availability. And so I would say it's more a heightened awareness of the fact that we may not be able to, from one, like again, sort of the idea from one year to the next, we may have to make accommodations And so we're seeing that in terms of the types of varieties that we're planting and even the locations of where things are being planted to just accommodate sort of the, this is what it is and this is the resources that we have available and this is how we can best make them work.
Thank you. We have a question from Anu J. So he asked for Agee, what makes your ranch experimental? Did taking that approach scare you? And how do you encourage other ranchers or farmers to embrace changes?
Oh, wow. I would like to say that we just did all of this because it was just this big light bulb moment. No, and so I think we were actually, our backs were against the wall financially and with the BLM and the agencies. So we were looking for something to work. And so that made it a lot easier to say we'd be willing to put up our ranch as an experiment to see if this works. And having the team and all the people behind it was another huge plus. Collaboration. I would never go back to doing business the way we used to do it. Having a team to work with, having everybody sitting down at the table and talking about things. And we've had fire, we've had all sorts of things on this place that have created some really intense conversations, but everybody is still at the table after 25 years. So
that's pretty impressive. All right. And then we have a question from Carly Highland. So they ask, in addition to market changes, are there any policy level changes in Idaho that could help support farmers or ranchers in the sustainability efforts panelists are discussing, particularly in the face of climate change? So maybe, Brandy, do you have any thoughts on that question?
Yeah, I think some of the solutions that we would look at, I mean, it kind of goes back to what I was talking about earlier and what Brit talked about too, is, we just kind of need that space to figure out what the solutions are. So I'm not sure that policy is, one of the things I really like about some of the policy and where it's going right now is in creating some of these innovation hubs. Like there's one around the hydrogen hub in the Northwest to try to figure out like, how do we do fuel switching to hydrogen better for industrial applications? And so I think where policy can come in and help foster collaboration, that's important. But in terms of creating additional regulation or additional standards, I think that's less helpful. So I think it kind of depends on what the policy is aimed for. So yeah.
Well, and some of the conversation I've heard too is like, people do things for incentives rather than being, having more paperwork to do, right? So thinking about how can we incentivize these changes and these different practices in new ways is maybe the way to be looking at it.
Yeah, and I mean, one of the things that we've done as a company in the last year is we've established a partnership with NRCS to try to make it easier for, farmers who are our customers on the fertilizer side of the business to access conservation funds and things like that, because it is a lot of paperwork right now. But a lot of the information and data that we're gathering through the Simplot Smart Farm platform can actually help facilitate some of those applications. And so what we're doing is really just trying to figure out like, how can we make this easier? Like, where's the easy button to access some of these funds that could help with more, conservation approaches on the farm? And we're also partnering on in terms of education, right? So NRCS has their trailer where they go out and they talk about soil health, and they have like the rainfall simulator, and you get to play in the dirt, and it's super fun. And we actually had them come out to the corporate headquarters and teach all of our accountants about playing in the dirt, which was really awesome too. But that partnership and doing things like that, I think around policy and trying to make, policy aspects that are more conservation oriented, more available to growers, I think is an important way to do it as well. So
great, thank you. I just saw one question come up that I think is an interesting one. So what do you see as the importance of conserving public lands for agriculture in the region? Are you worried about development in those spaces?
So the idea of public lands and access to public lands, I think, is something that doesn't necessarily get connected as directly to agricultural and rural life as it should. You know, part of our property abuts right up next to some BLM lands, and that land is then, of course, there's leases on it for cattle grazing, and then up next on the other side is we have the St. Anthony Sandhills, and that, of course, is its own separate attraction, bringing people in, and I think there's something to be said for the idea of being able to coexist together and to benefit from each other in terms of it represents the diversity that I think we want to see if we're talking about long-term stability. And the concern that I have about development isn't about development itself, it's about how we do development. And are we doing it in a way that takes into account sort of the realities of what a particular piece of property can support in the larger context of the community that's around, the resources that are available, and whether or not it actually makes sense for sort of that long-term strategic thinking for that piece of property to be developed the way that it's being proposed. Simply because there's nothing technically there on the property, to me, does not warrant or provide the argument for developing it. And so I would encourage and hope that we could have more thoughtful conversations about what development should look like in context based on the location of those different places, while at the same time recognizing that there is a genuine benefit to be had for public lands to exist alongside agricultural property, and that there is value in having a strong working relationship between, you know, the parties that are benefiting from both of those things.
Thanks, Brit. I'm hearing a lot about the importance of relationship building in all of this, in this whole panel. That's kind of what I'm taking away here. Okay, I think we have time for maybe one more question. And I would be curious. So Jared and I are here at Boise State. We represent, you know, faculty and staff here and students. And I'd be curious to hear from you all, like, what do you see as the role of what can students be doing to better engage with you? What kinds of research do you think is needed? Just kind of an open-ended question in terms of how universities can better support the work that you guys are doing.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, here at Simplot, I love having interns. I've had interns, I've had externs, I've had all kinds of things. And I also have pretty robust relationships with a couple of other universities. And I just really find, you know, student engagement to be amazing. And I think, you know, Brit made the point earlier, just, you know, go out and talk to people. You know, I'm out there on LinkedIn. I'm usually up for a cup of coffee anywhere. So just, you know, if this is a topic that really interests you as a student, then I think, you know, just reach out. But most people are pretty open and want to engage that generation as well. And I think in terms of research, you know, I think there's just a lot of really interesting work to be done in this area of sustainability more broadly. There's just, I mean, even if you look at the Idaho Climate Economy Impacts Assessment, I mean, that was 9 research reports done by our 3 universities here in Idaho. And just continuing that work, I mean, those 9 reports just kind of give the overview, and there's just a lot more that we need to do to kind of dive in and understand all of these aspects around climate change and sustainability in agriculture. So. Yeah.
So, thanks, Brandy. Brit or Agee, do you have anything you want to add to that?
I agree that the intern program through the university is really rewarding. We've had a little bit of that. We'd like to do more. It seems to me, and I think it is changing, but in agriculture, a lot of the times it seems like academia is behind what's going on out in the real world. And I think it would be, for us in Nevada, I don't think the university does a great job. They're working at it, they're getting better, but of really communicating with the people that are doing business, that are out on the ground, and finding out what their needs are and how. I think it would be, and I don't know how to do that, but it would behoove the professors and the different people in the know down there, or in those positions to, and maybe Zoom is a way to do it anymore. I don't know, but set up a way to communicate more with the industry and
Awesome.
so that they can find out what is needed out there.
That's a great point. And one of the goals of our institute is to do better communication with communities and organizations, so we can meet those needs better. So that's right in line with what we're interested in. Well, I know we're at the hour. I want to just say thank you so much to all of the panelists for your time and for Agee stepping in at the last minute. We so appreciate it. It's just been a real pleasure listening to you all today. And we will be picking back up next in January in the new year, talking about the campus and our specific role in terms of responsibility. And then we're also having an event. I'm going to put the flyer for it in January 11th. That's the goal of this event, is to launch this big grand challenge that we've been working on related to sustainability. And the event will be at Jump in Boise. And the goal of this event is to bring in university folks, but also community members. And we're going to launch a big grant that we're going to be putting out for community-based projects up to $50,000 each. So we encourage people to attend this event. We're going to be putting out more information about that soon. And Jared, do you have any last thoughts you want to share?
Just want to say thank you to everybody. Thank you for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you all. Have a really great
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day. Happy holidays, everyone.
Yep. Happy
Thanks,
holidays.
everybody.